welcome back to my channel. Today I'm doing my March wrap-up. I read 8 books in March, so I have lots to talk about. Let's get into it. The first book I read in March was Queen of Shadows by Sarah J. Maas. This was actually a reread for me, since I read this book for the first time in 2016, but I hardly remembered anything about the book, so it was like reading the book for the first time. I loved the story in this book, and how all the character storylines are interwoven so intricately. But my favorite part about this book was the scenes between Rowan and Aelin. I've noticed from rereading this series that I don't like Chaol as much as I did the first time around reading this series. Rowan puts Aelin's needs above himself no matter what. Definitely support Rowan as a character, and I love his relationship with Aelin. I also really liked learning more about Manon and just different things about the characters around her, as well as the history of the witches. I actually found Manon to be the most interesting part in this book. Now that some of the side characters actually get to meet Aelin, I loved Aelin reconnecting with some of these characters, and I especially loved Aelin's moments with her cousin Aedion. The interactions between them made me so emotional. I loved their relationship in this book as well. The conclusion to this book was awesome and so action-packed. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. I don't know why I didn't give it 5 stars the first time around. Naturally, I read Empire of Storms next. This is the 5th book in the Throne of Glass series, and I would consider this book more new adult compared to the previous installments in this series. I appreciated the fact that this book was more new adult, since the characters are getting older and are either in their 20s or entering their 20s. The romance in this book definitely reflected that. Again, my favorite part in this book was the romance between Aelin and Rowan. I'm so glad they finally got the chance to be intimate with each other after waiting for so long. It definitely paid off. As a whole, though, I felt like this 5th book in this series focused too much on the romantic relationships, and not a lot happened in terms of the plot to move the story forward. This book in the series was very romance-centric. I was a fan of all the romantic pairings, but I would definitely say the relationships took over the story, but the story bits that we did get in this book were significant. It certainly is a ride when you read a book from Sarah J. Maas. I liked that we got to learn more about the gods and what happened in the past with them to affect the lives of the characters in the present. We got to see a little bit of that in this book, and I enjoyed that part. I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars. Even though the romance did take over the story, I still really enjoyed this book. Next, I read Tower of Dawn. This is the 6th book in the series, and it follows Chaol and his journey in the southern continent. He's traveling to the southern continent in order to recruit allies in this war that's coming up in this series. Chaol is also paralyzed, and he's traveling there to get healers to heal him from his paralysis. This book definitely had a different feel to it compared to the other books in the series. And we finally get some character development from Chaol. His character hasn't really been that developed from the previous installments in the series, and this book definitely sees his character getting a lot of development. I really liked the disability representation in this book. It was realistic, in my opinion, since I have a physical disability. I appreciated that the author actually showed Chaol's physical struggle and all the therapy that he went through on a daily basis to get physically stronger and to try to overcome his disability. I also liked the fact at the end of the book that his disability wasn't just healed, despite the strength and the powerful healers that are in the Southern Kingdom. His perspective really changes in this book. He gets to reflect on just who he is as a person and just how he was raised. The differences between how he was raised and just the society in the Southern Continent are touched on the most. This dichotomy is what really changes him as a character in this book the most. In the Southern Continent, there's a king, and the king has a lot of children, and all the siblings are supposed to fight in this battle to the death to prove that they are the one worthy of taking the throne in the Southern Kingdom. I also really liked the slow development of Chaol's relationship with Irene. At the beginning of the book, they don't really like each other. Eventually a friendship develops between them, and I loved that they became friends first. Obviously, their relationship develops into something more, and Irene and Chaol realize that they have romantic feelings for each other. I also really liked Irene. She's a strong, independent character, and she wouldn't put up with any of Chaol's crap. I know that Chaol is annoying to some characters in this book, just based on how he treated people, and specifically Irene. I identified with his struggle in this book, and yes, he is annoying, and yes, he can be a little self-centered, but considering what he's going through and what he's trying to overcome, I fully identified with that. I felt like me and Chaol were on the same page while reading this book. I finally read Kingdom of Ash. This is the final book in the Throne of Glass series, and let me tell you, it was amazing. I loved absolutely every moment of it. I loved the journey that Aelin went through in this book. At the beginning of the book, considering how Empire of Storms ended, Aelin is really at the bottom of her rope at the beginning of this book. And by the end of the book, she rises and completely comes into her personality and realizes her full potential by the end of this story. I also loved the other character stories in this book, and every one of them had development, especially Manon. She definitely went through the ringer in this book, and I would say that she had the most character development and the most emotional development over everyone. However, I do have to say that I think there were too many romantic pairings in this final book, and I could have done without a couple of them. This book was emotionally heavy and so somber, since all of the characters are in a life and death situation. We really get an expansion of the gods that were talked about in Empire of Storms, and we get to see all of the backstory that happened with the gods, and how all of their choices and decisions have fully affected the characters in the present day. I couldn't stand Maeve in this book. I absolutely wanted to throttle her, and I couldn't stand the things that she did to Aelin at the beginning of this book. I loved Rowan as a character in this book, and how much he was willing to accept Aelin. He is willing to be with Aelin no matter what situation she's in, or how emotionally broken Aelin is at certain points in this book. He will be with her and by her side through whatever comes, and I love that about his character in this book. I enjoyed Dorian's development in this book and his storyline, but I was surprised by how much his father played an importance or a central role in his character development in this book. There were so many moments in this book that were emotional, and I teared up multiple times. This was definitely an epic finale and a great ending to the series. There was only a slight disappointment that I had with this book, and that is, I felt that Dorian and Manon's relationship didn't really come full circle. There is still development in their relationship to be had, and I wasn't pleased where their relationship ended by the time I finished this book. I'm really hoping that Sarah writes future books with their relationship in it so that they could have more of a happy ending. Next, I ended up reading Heir by Kristin Cashore. This is the second book in the Graceling trilogy, and this is a YA fantasy trilogy. Heir is actually a prequel book to the events in Graceling. I enjoyed Heir in this book. She's the main character, but I didn't really like any of the other characters, to be honest. Heir is a strong character. She's known as the last human monster, and anyone who's near her is ensnared by her beauty. Because of that, people in her kingdom are afraid of her. She has the ability to control minds. I didn't like Heir's best friend and lover Archer in this book. Heir eventually falls in love with this warrior named Briggan, and I felt that their romance developed too quickly. There wasn't really an emotional connection between Heir and Briggan, and there wasn't really any development in their relationship whatsoever. So I didn't really like that part in this book. There wasn't really much of a story in my opinion. The story is so focused on the characters that not a lot of story happens in Kristin Cashore's books. I ended up giving this book 3 out of 5 stars because I wasn't really connected to a lot of the characters, and this book was slow paced, and I prefer fantasy stories that have a little bit of a faster pace to them. I still enjoyed this book, but I would say it was definitely middle of the road for me. Naturally, the next book I picked up was Bitterblue. This is the 3rd book in the Graceling trilogy, and it takes place 8 years after the events of Graceling. Bitterblue is now 18, and she's supposed to be the queen in her castle now that her father is dead. King Luck was the king in her kingdom, and because he has the ability to control minds and plant false memories in people, Bitterblue is left to take charge of her kingdom after the devastating effects that her father left behind. Bitterblue isn't really sure how to be a queen, and she's not sure if she can do it. Her cousin, Prince Poe, appears in this book. He helps her make decisions and helps her figure out what to do. I liked this book a lot more than the previous one. There's definitely a lot more plot and story happening in this 3rd book than any of the previous ones. Bitterblue actually discovers that there were hidden rooms in the castle that King Luck kept secret from everyone. She also learned that there's a secret language that not everyone knows. She definitely goes through a lot of character development. This 3rd book is the best out of the trilogy. Even though I did like everything that happened in this book, it still wasn't one of the top stories for me. This trilogy as a whole is just middle of the road for me. It's a good trilogy, but it's not anything great or amazing. I'm glad I read this trilogy, but it received too much hype, in my opinion, from BookTube many years ago. I wouldn't necessarily see myself rereading it in the future, since it's not a fantasy series I really loved. The next book I read was The Warrior Heir by Cinda Chima, and I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. I didn't like this book much at all. David has always had a heart condition, so he takes medicine for his heart condition, but one morning he forgets to take it, and soon he starts to develop these strange abilities. David is a regular character who is just going about his life as a 16-year-old when he starts to develop abilities, and after an incident at soccer tryouts, he realizes that something different is going on. David meets with the assistant principal. The assistant principal is really there to help David control his abilities and learn about what's going on in his world and his place in it. David learns that he's supposed to take part in this fight to the death, and 2 rival courts are interested in recruiting him in this fight to the death. The world was underdeveloped, and I didn't like the writing style in this book. It honestly read more like a contemporary novel than a fantasy novel, and that wasn't what I was expecting. I was expecting to read a fantasy novel, and that's not really what I got. I enjoyed the side characters of David's friends, Will and Fitch, but I couldn't distinguish between them. The side characters were underdeveloped as well. I didn't like the romance in this book either, that takes place between David and a girl named Ellen. There wasn't any development in their relationship, and it was definitely insta-love. The story wasn't really interesting to me because it moved too slowly. The beginning was too slow, and I felt like the action in this book took place out of nowhere. The story definitely had pacing issues. The only thing I somewhat enjoyed about this book was the main character, David. Even so, David didn't really change that much as a character from the beginning to the end of the book. He was basically a static character and didn't really have much of a character arc or development at all. I definitely won't be continuing with this series since I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. The final book that I read in March was Theft of Swords by Michael J. Sullivan. It's the first book in an adult fantasy trilogy, and the books in this series are actually bind-ups. Each volume or each book has 2 books in one, and it's the first adult fantasy book I've ever read. I've talked about this book many times on my channel, but this series follows 2 thieves named Hadrian Blackwater and Royce Melbourne. These thieves go about their lives and are hired for different jobs, and everything seems to be going okay until they're falsely accused of killing the king. That's the story that happens in the first book, called The Crown Conspiracy. I really enjoyed getting to know Hadrian and Royce, and I loved the banter and humor between them. I've heard that not a lot of fantasy stories have humor in them, so I appreciated that aspect of this book. I really enjoyed the political intrigue in The Crown Conspiracy. I loved the side character of Arissa and her personal journey in this book, trying to figure out her feelings about her father, and the fact that she felt betrayed once she figured out who killed the king. Arista is a princess in this kingdom. She knows magic thanks to the help of a wizard. Crown Conspiracy really focused on introducing the characters and the political intrigue. The second story in this book takes place about a year after the events of the first book, and Royce and Hadrian are hired by a girl named Thrace to help her and her father defeat this monster that no one has been able to kill for centuries. This beast has been ravaging and killing people in their village. The only thing that will kill this beast is a magic sword that Hadrian and Royce have to find. The second story in this book was a lot more plot-driven, with Hadrian and Royce trying to accomplish one goal of defeating the beast. I felt that the goal of trying to kill the beast was dragged out in my opinion. I didn't really like the second story more than the first one, since there wasn't as much political intrigue. I did enjoy seeing Arista return in his second book, but there wasn't as much character development from her in the second book. However, I'm interested to see if her character develops further later on in the series. If I had to rate the books individually, I would give The Crown Conspiracy 4 stars and the second book 3 stars. This makes my rating for Theft of Swords as a whole to be 3.5 stars. I really enjoyed this first volume in the series, and I can't wait to continue. I definitely plan to get more into adult fantasy. This is just my first adult fantasy that I've read. Those are all of the books that I read in March. How many books did you read in March? And what was your favorite book that you read this month? If you want to see more videos from me, I'll put some videos up on the screen in case you guys want to check those out. Also, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I'll see you guys in my next video.